Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Wednesday, December 6, 2017. Some media outlets are picking up on a theme that we launched here on Monday. That former Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn's plea deal for lying to the FBI establishes that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and a foreign power. But it's a different foreign power than the Russiagate scandal informs us about. It is that Mike Flynn, at the behest of Benjamin Netanyahu and the radical Zionist government of Israel, channeled through Jared Kushner, the crown prince, Mike Flynn made the call to the Russian ambassador, hoping to get Russia to block the Obama administration's decision to abstain from a Security Council vote related to the illegal settlements that Israel has built on Palestinian land. This was clear interference by the incoming administration in the administration that was still in power. And it is a serious issue, in my opinion. But the nation has joined other outlets to indicate that this is a very important story, but it is ignored by the big corporate media outlets because, well, Israel is our deep, deep ally. And nothing Israel does, even when it attempts to direct American foreign policy in its interests over ours, nothing that Israel does appears to be subject to criticism in Washington. And so I commend Aaron Maté, the author of an article that I've linked to in The Nation. It's on their website today. And let's just recap this. Flynn has pled guilty to lying to federal investigators about his conversations with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak after the election and before the inauguration. And Flynn reached out to Kislyak as part of a vigorous diplomatic bid to undermine Obama's decision to allow a December 2016 Security Council resolution condemning illegal Israeli settlements. And the decision was a big shift for Obama. It came way too late, in my opinion, but I take it for what it is. And so Mueller's investigators have learned through witnesses and documents that it was Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel who asked the Trump transition team to lobby other countries on this issue. In short, says Maté, the first known contact between the Trump campaign and Russia after the election occurred in the service of a different foreign power, Israel, and was ultimately fruitless. They didn't do what Mike Flynn asked them to do. So this was an effort to undermine the sitting Obama administration. And Maté points out that in this post-election period and since Trump was inaugurated, Russia has endured many slights from the United States, new sanctions that Trump had no choice but to sign into effect in August. And he writes, only time will tell whether Flynn has something to offer Mueller or whether Mueller has gotten from him what he can. In the meantime, more than a year after the election, we still have exactly zero evidence of any cooperation between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Nor, it must be repeated, any evidence to back up U.S. intelligence officials' claims that the Russian government meddled in the election. What we do have is evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with Israel to subvert the U.S. government's official position at the UN Security Council. And he notes, as I have, that on Sunday, when Crown Prince Jared appeared at Haim Saban's pro-Israel forum, Saban thanked Kushner for his role in the subversion effort that Flynn admitted to. And Saban said, to be honest with you, as far as I know, there's nothing illegal here. Well, who asked you, Saban? And, of course, Haim Saban is the biggest donor to Hillary Clinton's political campaign. It's a lifetime honor that he's earned. He's donated more than $25 million to Bill and Hillary Clinton's political efforts. And that shows that it's a bipartisan lock, pro-Israel, damn the interests of the United States. And here comes a possible explanation of why Mike Flynn acted to cover up his contacts with the Russians. Not related to Israel, not related to the Obama sanctions, not related to the election. It was because Mike Flynn and a group of other people had formed a business venture intending to build nuclear power plants in the Middle East. It's going to be a big payday for the retired general who had to limp along with his military pension. This appears to be the motivation that Flynn had to smooth out relations with Russia, because they were looking to Russia for major financing of these nuclear plants in the Middle East. Now, this surfaces from an anonymous whistleblower and a letter from Congressman Elijah Cummings, the ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee. And he wrote the chairman, the Republican, who we all know as the guy who took on the Benghazi story. And Cummings is demanding that the chairman investigate these issues. And I certainly would like to see what he's asking for is subpoenas to get records from Flynn's consulting firm and related entities that could help us understand. Now, the whistleblower told a friend on Inauguration Day that he just received a text from Mike Flynn, and he asserted that Flynn was making sure that the sanctions would be ripped up as one of his first orders of business, and that this would allow money to start flowing into the project. And that's consistent with Mike Flynn's behavior. His $500,000 deal with a Turkish-related entity, the $15 million scheme alleged to kidnap Fethullah Gulen from Pennsylvania and return him to Turkey. What we're seeing is that the official narrative of Russiagate is crumbling away into a corruption scandal and obstruction of justice around that corruption. This is very different from what Rachel Maddow, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, along with the Democratic National Committee and allies of Hillary Clinton, have been pushing for over a year now. And I continue to respect Robert Perry at consortiumnews.com for his critical thinking and sharp analysis. He picked up on a story Monday in the New York Times which connected a member of the National Rifle Association who was attempting to connect the Trump campaign to Russian operatives. Maybe set up a meeting with Putin. This seems similar but quite separate from the Papadopoulos effort to set up meetings between Putin and Trump. And what Bob Perry notes is that these elements contradict the notion that Putin was grooming Trump for years, that Putin colluded in the election, because why did these people have to go to great lengths to set up new channels to connect Trump to Putin if they're already connected? Now, Rachel Maddow's done some good reporting last night in particular about Deutsche Bank, its money laundering efforts, particularly tied to Russians who wanted to get their money out of Russia. And while it's circumstantial, it's interesting because she makes the case that many of Trump's projects benefited from Russian investors who were presumably using Deutsche Bank to get their money out of Russia. And it's true that Donald Trump has received massive loans for his real estate empire from Deutsche Bank. Even after he stopped paying and they had lawsuits going back and forth. But Perry notes that one of the issues raised was the effort by Trump to build a hotel in Moscow. And if he were in Putin's pocket, Putin would have greased that and made it happen. But the Russians did not get involved, and when Trump's lawyer tried to contact them, they ignored him. And so, let me just recap, friends. I believe that Trump is deeply corrupt and that some of that corruption relates to Russia. His cronies in the cabinet, including Flynn, afflicted with the same virus. But this is very different from Russia hacked the DNC. Russia colluded to flip the election to Trump. And so I've linked to Bob Perry's piece. I hope you'll read it. He concludes by saying, rather than the many disparate strings of Russiagate coming neatly together more than a year after last year's election, the various threads either are becoming hopelessly tangled or flying off in different directions. You know by now that I don't cover sports much, but I will note that the International Olympic Committee really dinged Russia yesterday, and properly. Russia's Olympic team has been barred from the Winter Games in Pyeongchang, South Korea, opening up in February. The government officials are forbidden to attend. The flag will not be displayed. The anthem will not be played. Any Russian athletes who can prove that they're not doped up will perform in a white uniform without any nationalist markings. And the official record books will forever show that Russia won 0 medals. I think that's appropriate. I also think it's appropriate that the Russian Justice Ministry announced yesterday that the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and its other channels are now being required to register as foreign agents in Russia. Now, this is even more appropriate than the ham-handed move that required RT, Russia Today, and Sputnik to register as foreign agents in the United States. Because for years, going back to the Cold War, we've all known that the mission of Radio Free Europe, the Voice of America, Radio Liberty, these are American propaganda operations. We know that. That's their stated mission. I don't think we can be quite that clear about RT and Sputnik. I know that's what they are accused of, but I think that this is proper tit-for-tat from Russia. Now, we've all heard how Russian interests paid to use Facebook, and they had a troll farm that was putting up the organic posts on Facebook, all aimed at persuading American voters to tilt to Trump. Well, ProPublica has continued to follow Facebook ads this year. And in September, there was an ad posted and targeted to people over 40 who are described as very liberal by Facebook Analytics. The headline read, "New approval ratings for President Trump announced, and it's not going the way you think." And if you clicked on that to read the underlying story, you went to a site with malware that appeared to freeze your computer and demand cash to uninfect it. Well, this was a ruse because if you restarted the computer, the fake virus went away. But many people were fooled by it. They paid the extortion. Others were served ads for boner medications. So, on a headline, sponsors pull out from his show over this, with a picture of Sean Hannity. It led to a page styled to look like the Fox News website, and it offered you a free bottle of Testo Max HD. It's not an approved medication, but if you signed up for the free sample, you had to give your credit card to pay for shipping, and then they charged you $100 a month without your approval. So this is an important disclosure. Facebook has leaky problems there with their advertising platform. Mark Zuckerberg has acknowledged that they don't have humans review the ads before they go up. And at least for political ads or those that appear to be operating in that zone, it seems that Facebook is going to have to make some changes. Al Green is a feisty Democrat from Texas, member of Congress, and despite the fact that Nancy Pelosi and many fellow Democrats don't want him to do it, he's going to the House floor today to announce a resolution with articles of impeachment for President Donald Trump. Now, what's interesting is that he's not alleging any specific crime. He's just saying that it's time to remove Trump. He says hatred disguised as acceptable political correctness has festered in our body politic and polluted our discourse to our detriment. It divides and damages the social fabric of our country in ways that obstruction of justice cannot. It causes unparalleled destruction to our society in the long and short term that will not easily heal. And he's focused on Trump's connections to neo-Nazis, white nationalists, his reaction to the Charlottesville incident. And I certainly welcome efforts to impeach Trump. But it's a dead end unless Republicans decide to jettison their fearless tweeter. And Trump is compounding his problems today by going forward, completing a promise to Sheldon Adelson and some evangelical Christians to designate Jerusalem as the recognized capital of the State of Israel. Now, the U.S. Embassy will not be moved there immediately, but the talk is that Trump will authorize that. It'll take some time. But this is provoking very strong reactions from leaders of all religions, from the Pope to Muslims to non-religious Arab leaders. Former CIA Director John Brennan, not at the top of my list of people I respect, but he's accurate when he says Trump's action is reckless, will damage U.S. interests in the Middle East for years to come, and will make the region more volatile. And I remember a David Bowie song where he talks about putting out fire with gasoline. And in The Guardian today, Jonathan Friedland has a great commentary saying that Trump's Jerusalem statement is an act of diplomatic arson. He's got some good lines here. He says, not content with taking the U.S. to the brink of nuclear conflict with North Korea, Trump is now set to apply his strategy of international vandalism to perhaps the most sensitive geopolitical hotspot in the world. Here comes Trump, oblivious to precedent and indeed history, even in a place where history is a matter of life and death. And Friedland says, let's be clear, most advocates of an eventual two-state solution believe the only way to resolve the Jerusalem issue is for it to serve as the capital of both states, and that it has to be essentially the final step in any kind of a deal between the two hostile factions, Israel and the Palestinians. And in my San Francisco Chronicle, Janine Zakaria, no relation to the CNN guy, she teaches journalism at Stanford, was the Washington Post Jerusalem bureau chief. She says this is not the time to do it. Even if Trump was a brilliant negotiator, unilaterally altering U.S. policy regarding Jerusalem would unnecessarily antagonize 1 billion Muslims, undercut the U.S. ability to broker a future peace deal. It also is exceptionally unwise to risk another conflagration in the Middle East. And she cites a cascade of warnings coming from Germany, France, the Arab states. Turkey threatened to sever ties with Israel. The State Department ordered U.S. embassies to heighten security. And to her credit, Dianne Feinstein, a Jewish woman and senior senator from California, wrote a letter to Trump saying he would spark violence, further alienate the United States, and undermine the prospects of a two-state solution. But as The Intercept points out today, Dianne Feinstein is one of the few members of Congress willing to publicly criticize this move. Polls show that 81% of Democrats are against this, but very few Democratic leaders are speaking up. One exception is Bernie Sanders, who I criticized for really failing to address foreign policy, and in particular the Israel-Palestine conflict, when he ran for president last year. But he issued a strong statement. There's a reason why all U.S. past administrations have avoided making this move. It would dramatically undermine the prospects for an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement and severely, perhaps irreparably, damage the U.S. ability to broker that peace. But Democrat Ben Cardin, he's the ranking Dem on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he said, well, it's true, the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. Richard Shelby, Republican of Alabama, asked about concerns that this could provoke violence. Well, there can't be much more violence than what's already there. How ignorant is that? Ted Cruz backs the move. Sherrod Brown, the alleged progressive from Ohio, took a wait-and-see approach. Let's see what happens when he announces it. John McCain ducked. I'd like to hear some details. Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, Republican, rumored to be the next CIA boss. No comment. Cory Booker of New Jersey, a top ally of pro-Israel donors, declined to comment. You get the picture. And so once again, I as I rarely do, commend Senator Feinstein for her action. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Stalwarts like the folks at Technical Support Cooperative, Teresa Paris, Cheryl Fleming, and Andrew Michaeletts just renewed his annual subscription. Thanks to each of you. And I'd like to invite you, the person who never hears your name called because you're not a subscriber, come on, get on the stick. Come on over to peterbcollins.com. Click on menu, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. That takes you to the sign-up page where you can make an easy choice of the level of support that fits your budget. Well, you know, Time magazine, there was this back and forth where Trump declined to be named Person of the Year. Well, it appears he was never in the running because they have named all of the women who have courageously come public with their accusations about powerful men of sexual harassment and sexual assault. They are referred to as the silence breakers. And on the cover, Time features Ashley Judd and Rose McGowan, who exposed Harvey Weinstein for his exposure of himself. Tarana Burke, creator of the Me Too movement, and Hollywood star Alyssa Milano. The editor said, the galvanizing actions of women on our cover, along with those of hundreds of others and many men as well, have unleashed one of the highest velocity shifts in our culture since the 1960s. And the heat is growing on Al Franken to resign. 12 members of the U.S. Senate, his Democratic colleagues, held a news conference led by New York Senator Gillibrand. Kirsten Gillibrand said, enough is enough. We need to draw a line in the sand and say none of it is okay, none of it is acceptable. We as elected leaders should absolutely be held to a higher standard, not a lower standard, and we should fundamentally be valuing women. That is where this debate has to go. She was joined by Hawaii's Mazie Hirono, Missouri's McCaskill, New Hampshire's Hassan, California's Harris, Wisconsin's Baldwin, Michigan's Stabenow, North Dakota's Heitkamp, Washington's Patty Murray, along with Indiana's Donnelly, Pennsylvania's Casey, and Ohio's Brown. Many of those are pretty close allies of Al Franken. And Tom Perez, chair of the DNC, has joined their calls. Franken's office said there will be an announcement tomorrow, but didn't give further details. And there is a seventh allegation coming from an unnamed woman who told Politico that when Franken was hosting on Air America back in 2006, and boy, he was a lousy radio host, and he sucked so much money out of Air America, it was really a disaster. Anyway, we don't know who this woman is, but she said that Franken was at a radio station doing his show. When it was over, he was between me and the door. He was coming to me to kiss me. It was very quick. I ducked. I was startled by it. But he said that he had the right as an entertainer to kiss her. Now, Franken says that he thinks that is a preposterous claim and that this never happened. But at this point, he is defenseless. And I have raised this issue and received a flaming email response from listener Deborah Kennedy. She said, I listened to your interview with Correa and Vitale about police reform. I was really enjoying it when you interjected out of the blue that the men who've been fired by their employers for sexual harassment haven't received due process. Due process is a concept that applies to criminal charges because of the threat of loss of freedom that jail and prison terms entail. It applies to labor and employment cases only when the employee has it in their labor agreement. Do you have any idea if all these men have due process in their contracts? Because I haven't heard anyone say that. Otherwise, they probably work at will with some other terms in their contracts. But hey, Peter, thanks so much for your support of the female part of your audience. Keep protecting the creeps, since you are one of them. Well, I am quite accustomed to receiving critical comments, even with name-calling. It comes with the territory. But I responded to Deborah thusly. I just saw your comment, and I understand your narrow parsing of due process. Charlie Rose, Garrison Keillor, Kevin Spacey, and Matt Lauer are all members of my union, SAG-AFTRA, and the shop contracts that their personal agreements are based on include protections for wrongful termination, even when an employer cites just cause. These men appeared to have waived those rights, but they do exist. I've been defending the rights of the accused consistently for decades, many of whom have been considered creeps by somebody, and in some cases almost everybody. The current wave of mob judgment of public figures can be applied arbitrarily or with bad intentions. There's no doubt that many evil men are being exposed, but that end does not justify the means, which are not based on fundamental values of fairness and a presumption of innocence. My views are shaped by real-world experience. As a teenager, my brother was falsely accused of being a peeping Tom by a neighbor who then tried to blackmail my parents for a large sum of money. In recent years, as a board member of the Freedom Foundation, I've reviewed dozens of cases of wrongful convictions of prisoners in California, some of which included false accusations of sex crimes. You are mistaking my defense of the rights of the accused with a defense of criminal acts, which I've never made. You can call me a creep and accuse me of protecting creeps. Name-calling won't change my commitment to fairness, even for people you decide are creeps. There's so much news, and I have so little time, I'm going to try to compress things into a couple of quickies here. First, I want to start with some statistics, and my pappy once told me that liars can figure, but figures don't lie. The 3, at least, wildfires that are threatening the Los Angeles metropolitan area have forced 160,000 people to evacuate in the last day or day and a half. Major freeways, the 405 and the 5, are shut down in places which hamper people's efforts to evacuate. It's a very serious situation, and I send my best wishes to people after we endured the wine country fires just a couple of months ago here in the northern part of California. More statistics. The wealthiest 1% of American households own 40% of the country's wealth now. This is the biggest gap since 1962. The share of wealth, as measured in 2013, the amount owned by the 1% shot up by nearly 3%. Wealth owned by the bottom 90% fell over the same period. Today, the top 1% of households own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. With that, you won't be surprised that the latest census of homeless people in the United States shows a measurable increase. We have almost 600,000 people who are officially homeless in this country, 55,000 in Los Angeles alone. And I was there just after Thanksgiving. I saw a lot of tents in downtown L.A. And by the way, I drove right past the Getty Museum where the wildfires are burning in the Bel Air Hills right now. There was an increase of homelessness of 4.1% in New York and measurable increases in Seattle, Portland, San Diego, Sacramento, and Oakland. Other stats, the Border Patrol made 310,000 arrests during the fiscal year ending September 30th, a decline of 25%. So it's clear that Trump has intimidated people, and the message is out. Fewer people are attempting to cross the border. In addition, we've seen a surge in people deported, and the Obama administration was no slouch in deporting non-citizens. The increase is 25% during the past year, and The rate of interior removals, people deported after being arrested away from the border, has also jumped by 25%. More than 100 American prisoners have died after being shocked by a taser, which we're told is a less lethal weapon. Since 2000, 104 prisoners have died, and only 2 of them were armed. I find that pretty obscene. And in another quickie category here, world leaders in the news, a Spanish judge has withdrawn the arrest warrant for Catalan leader Puigdemont, Carles Puigdemont. He's currently in Belgium, and the extradition has been withdrawn because Belgium would have sharply limited the charges that could have been pressed if he were returned to Spain in that manner. Almost comical. Yesterday, Mikhail Saakashvili, who is the former president of the former Soviet Republic, Georgia, who has more recently been appointed to positions in Ukraine by the Candyman Petro Poroshenko. But they've had a falling out, and yesterday the cops went calling at Saakashvili's apartment, and he ended up climbing up on the roof to try to evade them. Masked security forces grabbed him, dragged him down, but then his supporters rallied and surrounded the security van that he was in, and they freed him. They sprung him. These are strange days. In Honduras, there is a disputed election between the current president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, and his challenger, Salvador Nasrallah. Nasrallah claims election fraud, and it appears that he has a legitimate claim. And finally, in this category, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Saad Hariri, has withdrawn his resignation that he made, some people thought under duress, on a visit to Saudi Arabia a month ago. He's going to stay on, and he said the Lebanese government, through all its political components, disassociates itself from any conflicts or wars, as well as the internal affairs of Arab countries, to protect Lebanon's political and economic relations with its Arab brothers. And finally today, I suspect Jeff Sessions is responsible for this one, but you may know that last week a jury in San Francisco acquitted the man accused of firing the weapon that killed Kate Steinle. They basically found him not guilty of first, second-degree murder and manslaughter. He was convicted of a single charge of being being a felon in possession of a weapon. But yesterday, a federal grand jury, we don't know who convened it or who fed them this, but they charged Jose Inez Garcia Zarate for the same thing that he was convicted of last week. Now, I think this is double jeopardy, but I'm not a legal expert. But the grand jury also preferred a charge of being an illegally present alien. Now, this is ridiculous. This ends up keeping Zarate in the United States as a political football for some unspecified period of time, because he was due to be sentenced under the state conviction next week and most likely would have been turned over to the feds for deportation almost immediately. But now we're going to drag this out and keep the Kate Steinle tragedy in the news for political purposes for some time to come. Isn't it sad? Thanks for joining me today for my News and Comment podcast. We try to post it on YouTube every day, and occasionally it doesn't work. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling